Hey, Jordan, we are ready on eScribe, YouTube, and I think you're good to go.
Great, thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. I am going to go ahead and call the Land Use and Planning Committee for April 6th to order. We continue to meet virtually, and the instructions to join the meeting remain unchanged and can be found on our meeting agenda. Our first item of business is roll call. Amanda, can you call the roll?
Yes. Anderson? Absent. Becerra?
Present.
Carlino? Absent. Contos? Absent. Hess?
Present.
Jones?
Present.
Jordan? Absent. Nugent? Absent. Savage?
Present.
Cheryl?
Present.
Vasika?
Present.
West?
Present.
And I'm going to go back up to the top. Carlino?
Present.
Contos?
Here.
Perfect. I'm just going to skim through, make sure no one else arrived. All right. I don't see any new attendees, so I will turn it over to you now.
Great, thank you. And we have minutes from the meeting last week on March 30th. Are there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those will be approved. Is there any public comment on items not listed on our agenda? So if you're here for either the Greeno Heights subdivision or the Big Neck Flats plat adjustment, we'll get to those in a moment. But if there's any comments on non-agenda items, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, we have two regular agenda items, and we'll take them in the order listed. The first is a continued discussion on the Greeno Heights major subdivision and rezoning. And we had a public hearing on that on Monday the 4th. We'll have that back for final consideration on Monday, April 11th. And I'll turn it over to Dave DeGrandpré for any additional information that may be relevant to our discussion today. Dave?
All right, thank you. And good morning, counselors. Dave DeGrandpré with CPDI. Let's see, a couple of housekeeping notes. One, I'm just going to share my screen briefly. Just wanted to remind the committee that we are operating, when reviewing a subdivision and zone change, we're operating under particular requirements of both state law and our local code. The Subdivision and Platting Act is found under, and there's a state statute under 76.3, and also the city subdivision regulations. They govern subdivision review procedure and criteria. Montana Code annotated 76.2304, and also Missoula Title 20 provides zoning amendment procedures and criteria, and those are reflected in the staff report. And so when we evaluate a subdivision at the staff level and also a zone change at the staff level, we're walking through and evaluating the proposal underneath the criteria that's listed here. And then let's see, city staff or counselors have requested city staff members talk about different elements of this project and how it fits into the community. So today, Aaron Wilson, transportation planner with the city of Missoula, is here. And I know that he has a fairly short time frame. He has other obligations. So maybe if transportation questions could be asked first, I think that would be most helpful. Andy Schultz is here from Public Works and Mobility to discuss stormwater, erosion control, things along those lines, as requested by council. And then also Nathan McLeod from City Parks and Rec is here as well to answer your questions. So that's all I have right now.
Great, thanks, Dave. So I think we will do exactly that. We'll go to questions, and let's take questions on transportation-related matters first, so that we can respect Aaron's time. Jennifer.
Sorry, Jordan. This computer and I are still getting acquainted. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Aaron, for being here. I had questions specific to, I've gotten several calls and emails about the traffic on Greeno/Duncan Drive and speeds and the number of cars. And I'm wondering if there have been any traffic studies related to this project or otherwise that have tracked the number of cars or sort of speeds, and particularly on that hill coming, just past where this development would be, if you were to say take a left off of that property down that hill. That seems to be the biggest concern. And also another piece of concern is the crosswalk that's just before the tracks in North 2nd. So I'm wondering if there have been any traffic studies or if there could be any sort of studies to talk about speeds and number of cars on Greeno Drive.
Yeah, I can start to address that. Related to the number of vehicles that Greeno Drive is on our urban traffic count program system, and so we do periodic counts there, and we have access to that, and we can monitor that over time, and that's certainly something that we factor into all of our long range planning and travel modeling and things like that. So when we're looking at what are the conditions today and what does that look like into the future, and so we do try to keep pretty good tabs of that city and region wide, and Greeno Drive is certainly on that network. So I do think we have good volume data for Greeno. Related to speed studies and things like that, I will check with, I know we've done some work there, like we spent a lot of time looking at Greeno Drive because we've heard a lot. We've also heard a lot from the neighborhood. And so it's on our radar as something that we want to keep an eye on. So I can find out, hopefully, sort of as we go here, what the status of any speed studies are and what the result of that was. So let me put a pin on that, and I'll see if I can get some info from Ben while we're chatting.
Okay, that would be great. And also in particular to that crosswalk, there was a time when it was striped. It's no longer striped. But there are ADA, whatever the infrastructure is that one calls that on the sidewalks. And what I'm hearing a lot is that people are coming down that hill and they come so fast that you can't even see the crosswalk before you hit the I-90 underpass thing there, and that there's no time to stop. And I mean, I can tell you from personal experience as an able-bodied person, like it's sketchy right there. And so I just wonder if there are any plans with, increased cars, development, if there would be any plans to stripe it again. Yeah, just that particular spot is hard.
Yeah, definitely. And what I can do, regardless of sort of what we've done in the past, is add that intersection and that hill to our list of topics for our transportation safety team. We look at these kinds of issues all over the city. We'll go and look at the crash data. We can do the speed studies. We can put the speed trailer out there to help to see if that helps, or see like what our speeds are, and then take all that information and look at what potential mitigation strategies are. And it could be as simple as just adding some new fresh paint for that crosswalk. It could be that we need some other treatments there to help manage that, but we do have a fairly proactive process for taking those safety, I don't want to call them complaints because that's not the right word, but safety issues that we hear both from city council, from members of the public, or our own just sort of internal analysis of crash data and safety issues. And we'll put that into the queue of all of the potential projects that we have to address. And we try to evaluate those based on the need, so how significant is the safety issue based on the crash data and the complaints, and what are the other contexts, and so we can elevate issues that have a higher safety impact more quickly. So I will for sure add this to our transportation safety team, and we can keep council and updated on what we find and what we identify as good, quick solutions. And then sort of the long term, like if it's a larger infrastructure project, get that into our CIP process, make sure we understand where it fits into all of our other priorities, and make sure we're not ignoring it, that it's in the system for improvement.
Great. And can I have one more follow-up, Jordan? I'm sorry. I realized I didn't ask earlier. And then there's a proposed crosswalk actually across or sort of in front of where this development would be. Are there any like proposed, I don't know if it's, I have questions about the placement of that crosswalk. It looked like on the plans, it's just under a rise, and I just, for visibility and those kind of issues, I wonder, will there be any sort of calming or slowing that, is on the uphill end of that, coming down Duncan? I don't know if that's been a part of the conversation yet or not, but.
I know, Dave, DeGrand, maybe you can follow. I don't know if you've heard back from surface engineering on evaluation of those site visibility, the site visibility analysis that the developers submitted. Certainly something we were looking at and trying to evaluate and make sure that was a safe location for a crosswalk.
Yes, just this morning I heard from Ryan Guelph, and he said the site triangles are drawn with the appropriate dimensions per AASHTO standards and a 30-mile-per-hour posted speed limit. Visibility generally looks adequate. He says, other than that, it does appear the road profile could create an obstruction for left turn departures from the west approach. So this is not where this is downhill from where the crosswalk would be. He said, here are a few, although the drawings look appropriate, he said, there are a few ideas they could look at to help mitigate the issue. Obtain speed distribution data to see if actual speeds are at or below or above 30 miles per hour. Could look into the existing 25-mile-per-hour speed zone to the south and continue that through the development frontage, or control egress from the west approach to right out only. So there are some options for looking at that if safety becomes an issue.
And I think I would just add that we could do the same kind. We could include that crosswalk in the same analysis and make sure that all of those things are working in a way that's safe and appropriate to the context.
Okay, I have a couple other questions, Jordan, but I'll let someone else go. I'll line up at the end.
Are they transportation related or?
I did just have I had a couple questions about the 700 and whatever feet of sidewalk. So I don't know if that's considered transportation or because the question really was about the long-term plan of Duncan and Greeno and sort of when, generally speaking, what does that look like? And when is that project supposed to be taken up?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that now.
Okay. So in terms of that 700 feet of sidewalk, I think that part of the recommendation was that if we were to require that it would get in the way of other long-term plans. So I was just wondering if you could speak to those long-term plans just a bit.
Yeah, so maybe starting at big picture with the regional, the long-range transportation plan. Greeno Drive complete street improvements are on our list of projects that we know there's a need for. So it's part of that regional analysis where we look at, what funding do we think we have available over the next 30 years, and what are all, it's the broad range of projects that we think we could do. And we looked really closely at how we prioritize those projects, and which ones we want to recommend for funding and which we think are just going to be unfunded unless we find some other source of revenue to do more than our conservative estimate might project out over that time period. Knowing that there's a lot of uncertainty, 30 years is a long time to project on transportation funding when things tend to happen sort of at best yearly at the federal level. And so there's a lot of uncertainty, but in any case, Greeno Drive is on that list. I believe it was one of our recommended projects for funding, and we did hear about that during the long range plan process. It is also one of the projects on the city's community improvement program, CIP prioritization list. And so we have a process for the city to identify what projects are we funding next based on how well they meet our goals in terms of planning and safety and equity and existing development, leverage potential, all of those factors. We're looking at all of those projects together to see like what are our most impactful investments that we can make today. So kind of moving from regional level, the transportation plan has identified this project. It is one that we know we need to do. The CIP has looked at this project and where it falls in our sort of city priority of, the next 5 years of funding and what we think we can construct. And so it's on those lists. It hasn't currently risen to the level of priority based on all those evaluation metrics that we have for prioritizing projects, but it's on the list. So it's hard to say exactly when we'll get to it because it really depends on how much funding we get for projects. There's cost inflation right now. Transportation and infrastructure in general is just really challenging. Like we know we're probably not going to keep up with demand, and that's true nationwide. That everyone is struggling with this as we move forward. So that said, that we do have some interim steps that we know we want to take for Greeno Drive. One of those is trying to identify what the design is for, like, how do we want to design this street? There's some areas that have really, much more constrained right of way than other streets. It can get really narrow, which gives us challenges for, how do we accommodate sort of a full, complete street multimodal design? And before we commit to a specific design moving forward, we want to do some neighborhood engagement. So we want to talk to the residents along Greeno Drive, the Rattlesnake neighborhood in general, and try to identify sort of like how we can prioritize use of that right of way and look at some creative design options and really figure out which one is going to meet that need. So I think before, even if we had funding today, we wouldn't want to go out and start construction or necessarily have this subdivision build, say, sidewalk infrastructure that may not be fit into that overall design. And we may be able to come up with something more creative or different than a typical sort of boulevard, sidewalk, bike lane, collector street design, given that narrow right of way. So I think there is some benefit to holding off on some of those improvements until we know exactly what that design looks like. For Greeno Drive. And we have that, it's on our work plan. We have a lot of priorities obviously right now. And because Greeno Drive isn't one of our current priority 5-year CIP projects, it's, we've got to balance it with getting those projects moving forward. But our hope is in the next year or so, it's on our list of public engagement that we want to figure out what to do with Greeno Drive. So hopefully that answers that question of when and how we address Greeno Drive in the context of our broader planning priorities and how we're funding infrastructure. But yeah, if there's anything I've missed or if you have any clarifying questions, I'd be happy to dive into more detail. But that's sort of from the broadest view down to sort of the specifics of Greeno Drive, how we are looking at that facility specifically.
Great, thanks, Aaron. Next up, Heidi, and then Amber.
So I think Aaron addressed a large part of what I just, my first question, which was about the width of the right of way. I guess a specific question to that would be, is there any plan to actually try and, I guess, purchase more right of way along Greeno? I know that can be a really long and drawn out process, as we learned with Russell Street, whereas the goal to design within, I guess, the constraints that we have.
That's a good question. I think that really needs to come out of those conversations with the neighborhood. And when we start looking at design and, my perspective is it's much easier to do if we can work within the existing right of way. It's just a more straightforward, it's less costly, right of way costs go up at about the same rate as housing costs. So that can lead to a lot of cost escalation on a project and just less efficient. But I think as we go into the design and see if there are really locations where there is a limitation in right of way that just prevents us from getting a safe and accessible facility, then that I think we need to look hard at the potential for getting additional right of way in those locations.
Okay. And then I have 2 more questions, if that's that okay, Jordan. Okay, so second question is also related to sidewalks. But I heard during our presentation on Monday night that there's going to be the creation of a special district that they can't protest a future special district, I think is what I wrote down, to potentially pay for future improvements. And I was wondering how that, I guess, interfaces with existing lots and existing homeowners. I assume it wouldn't just be the subdivision that would be a part of that special district, right? Any thoughts?
No, probably not, but I don't know that I could comment specifically on like who would be included. I think again, that sort of really depends on the project and how that funding package comes together. I think a special improvement district is one tool to get projects funded a little bit quicker, especially if the neighborhood is really behind doing something, and there's a willingness to sort of get that funded using a special improvement district. And it sort of ensures that this development, if there's deferment on some of those street improvements, that they won't come in, the future property owners won't come and protest that, and then we're not able to use that tool at a later date. I believe there are also, actually, I am not 100% confirmed on this, but typically when there's a deferral of things like sidewalk construction with a development project, if we come through with, say, a public works CIP project, that those deferrals aren't eligible for the sidewalk subsidy because we're essentially sort of waiving their requirement to do it today, but knowing that we're going to come in later and build that facility. And so typically those properties aren't eligible for the sidewalk subsidy. And so there would be a property assessment associated with that property in the future if we were to come through with a publicly ordered project.
Got it. So this isn't a guarantee that there's going to be a special improvement district. It's just in case that is the funding mechanism that's used in the future, then they can't protest.
Yes.
And then I have my last question is about, I guess the improvements, it's traffic related, but about the improvements at the trailhead that are planned for the north side trail access there. Do we have an idea of what, I know when we improve things, there's usually an increase in users. Do we have a predictive bump that we're planning on seeing as far as like car traffic goes with those improvements?
That's a good question, and that might be a better one for Nathan from the Parks and Recreation is managing that the Minkler Loop road improvement and North Hills Trailhead project. And I don't know if there's been an analysis of how much additional vehicle traffic, but I do believe there is a design for number of parking spaces, if I'm not wrong. But I'm not that familiar with that project, so.
I'd have to look to see what the exact number of parking spaces it is. Currently, that trailhead is one of the busiest in the city, actually. And so the improvements are intended to make it a much safer intersection than what's there now. But I don't know of any studies that have shown if there will be an increase in traffic there or not. I would imagine that there probably will be. If it's going to be a better trailhead, it's going to have better ADA access. It includes a universally accessible trail. So I could find out some of that and get back to you.
Thanks. Amber and then Mirta.
Yeah, thanks. And I think Aaron's answered a lot of the questions. I'll be interested in that speed study as well. My questions, I guess, are more than for Nathan. Just talking about, I had asked some questions on Monday night just about the thinking around having the open space not have access or trail down to Greeno Park. I know it's steep. So if you want to speak to that and just kind of the thoughts around it from Parks. Also, as we're talking about waterworks and the improvements and as you said, you improve it, build it, they will come. I just, thinking about, I'm thinking about people accessing that more on foot too, and the lack of sidewalk there. And I just, are there going to be any changes so Greeno's one, getting down to Greeno, and thoughts around that and how the neighborhood's going to access Greeno. And then also waterworks, is there going to be are there going to be any changes to how people can access that trailhead on foot? I mean, getting to the trailhead on foot, not just the car traffic. Am I being clear? I'm kind of wandering around the subject. I'm wondering about trail rerouting and things like that.
Yeah, so in terms of waterworks, there will be a sidewalk that goes up along Minkler Loop, which is the new access road to the new parking area. And that will attach to the existing infrastructure on Greeno. Aaron might be able to answer what that sidewalk, where that ends on Greeno. I'm not quite sure how far up it goes.
The sidewalk currently ends at Minkler Loop on Greeno Drive, and so there is that gap between this development and that trail access. And I was just trying to look to see, and maybe Nathan, if you know this, there could be some access across Greeno to Peggio Lane and that development. And I don't know if there's any trail access specifically from that sort of subdivision development area on the north side of Greeno into the trail, or if it's only at Minkler Loop trailhead.
It's only at Minkler Loop at this time, but that we do have an easement with an agreement with the owners of that development. My understanding is that the Minkler Loop road is being designed to provide vehicular access to that development in the future when they develop future phases. And so at some point there will be access through that property.
So I guess, putting that out there as a potential future access, having the pedestrian crossing across Greeno sort of at this development into the Peggio Lane would be sort of an alternate access up to that trail system in the future, while we're still, looking at long-term or, figuring out the Greeno Drive improvements that could be a connection along the main route. So I think there are a number of opportunities to create better connectivity there.
Yeah. And Amber, to answer your question about the Cherry Gulch property that would come over to Parks as part of this subdivision, it is really steep in there, and there's not really a great way to create a sustainable trail through that property. Potentially a single track that switchbacks a bunch of times, but there's a lot of water in there. It's pretty wet year round. And so it wouldn't really be desirable for us to put a trail through there. And the other thing to think about is with the way this subdivision is laid out, there's not really a good way from the subdivision itself to get into that Cherry Gulch. It's adjacent to private lots. It's something that we would have to look at and manage if a trail does develop. But honestly, if someone tries to walk down there, they're going to slide on 100 years of maple leaves and just end up at the bottom.
Thanks. And Jordan, may I have just a follow-up comment more than a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I was thinking that if it is steep enough, maybe that will discourage people from, other than, maybe kids messing around in there, then to use that. Yeah, I mean, I guess as we're talking about transportation, as we're talking about all these very close parks and recreation areas that are super appealing and are going to become more appealing. And it's so messy in there with that lack of that sidewalk, and then people on different sides of the street trying to get to different recreation areas. And so, I think this is something that Jennifer has been talking about, and I know she asked a lot of questions about the safety of crosswalks and the traffic flow. But that's just such a, I guess I'd like to see this rise a little higher on some of our lists for safety and for complete streets and all those, because I just think that it's sure, but man, it's messy. It's messy in there as far as getting people back and forth and people going down and sight lines and all that. So.
Okay, thanks. Mirta?
Thank you. I was trying to find the language in the staff report. There would be an SID for not installing the sidewalks right now, correct? Okay, so what I guess
there would not be an SID to install the sidewalks along the subdivision property. The subdivider would be responsible for that.
Okay. I I guess my question is, if sidewalks are not installed now, then they would have to be put in once improvements for Greeno are triggered, correct? Yeah. Okay. And so I guess my question is, and I should know this by now based on all the conversations that we've had about sidewalks and financing of sidewalks, but if it's not put in now, then the cost would be of installing that sidewalk would fall on the property owners versus installing them right now, which would be the developer, yes, passed on to the home buyer. But given that the cost of materials, securing contracts and everything is going up, wouldn't it make sense to just require them now versus later when they might cost more and they get passed on to the future owners?
I can address this, Aaron, if you'd
Yeah.
like. So
Sure.
the conditions of preliminary approval that are proposed by staff and have been recommended by the planning board require the developer to install all the improvements. So that's internal subdivision road, sidewalks, et cetera, sewer, water, and also along Greeno Drive. So the subdivider is on the hook, so to speak, for those improvements. However, the subdivider has the option under state law to enter into an improvements agreement with the city. So it's a contract, in other words, and that requires financial security. So some sort of a bond or irrevocable letter of credit. Basically, the subdivider deposits with the city a guarantee that includes financing that those improvements will be made within a certain period of time. So the subdivider doesn't get to pass it on. The subdivider might include those improvement costs, in the cost of each lot, but it wouldn't be for the future lot owners to install those improvements. The subdivider is on the hook either before final plat or through an improvements agreement that would have a certain 2 to 3 year time period.
Great. Okay, that's good to know. And may I have a follow-up, Jordan?
Go ahead.
I get this is more just general, I guess, policy, but Aaron, you and I had this brief conversation about CIP prioritization and how I think it would be really helpful to have development and the pressures of development on our infrastructure or lack of infrastructure sometimes as another component of that prioritization that we have for CIP projects. And I understand that, what we see before city council is only a certain number of development, that there's a lot more development that we don't see that comes through building permits. So there might be other parts of town that certainly are seeing a lot of impact that we don't really know about. But I think it would be really, it would be interesting to see if we can explore that possibility for projects like this that put pressure on infrastructure as part of the CIP prioritization project.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it's something that we try to do, especially in our kind of regional with the long range transportation plan, and as we're looking at how to prioritize projects. And I think it is important to keep in mind that yes, we have a subdivision going in here on Greeno Drive that has 20 units or so, and you're seeing those, and there's a direct avenue for the neighborhood to comment on that. That 20 units might be the equivalent of one apartment building that's going in say the Franklin to the Fort neighborhood, where you have no sidewalks, you have no street lighting, you have poor access to parks, not good safe routes to school, all of those same pressures. And you may not see, that could be several hundred units in that neighborhood where we have a lack of infrastructure. And so we're trying to balance where we're investing our current dollars, not to say that we're ignoring or trying to dismiss what's happening on Greeno Drive, but putting that in the context of if we were to do Greeno Drive today, we wouldn't do these other facilities that are also seeing development pressure, just not through a subdivision process that sort of brings it into more public scrutiny, I guess, outside of at city council or in the neighborhood. So I think that's part of our consideration. And I think it's getting back to the point of factoring in those growth pressures on our CIP prioritization is a really good idea, and something that I think we could continue to look at. And maybe an appropriate way to do that is one, through long range planning's sort of annual development guide, or sort of our look back at, what have we seen in over the last 3 to 5 years in terms of development in different neighborhoods, and how does that compare with existing transportation infrastructure? So where are we seeing the most pressure versus where do we have the greatest deficiencies, and try to line those up as much as possible. I think the second area where there's a real opportunity to look at that is through the code reform update, where we are going to be looking at things like zoning and our development codes, and we could really look at where we're seeing pressures and use that as an opportunity to think about street design standards and how we're prioritizing projects, and where we're wanting to incentivize development for any number of reasons, and how that lines up with infrastructure deficiencies. So again, I think it's really important to look at those kinds of decisions sort of as a big picture, and be able to evaluate all of the trade-offs. Because anytime you prioritize one project, you are not doing, say, 70 other projects that we have on the list. And we want to be making the best decision possible within the existing resources that we have. And it's never an easy decision. We're always, not deferring some improvement that has a ton of merit and value and impacts people in their daily lives. But that's true of every project that we're not doing today. So, and then I think at the same time, we're trying hard to find additional resources and be more creative in getting more done with the amount of funds we have available. So, and there's a lot of federal funds out there. So projects like Greeno could be a really good candidate for some of those federal funds that allow us to do projects that we're not currently able to do right now. So, I guess that's, sort of how we approach it, and my recommendation for a way that City Council could really dive into some of those decisions and try to help us understand, make sure we're putting our investments in the areas that best prioritize the city's goals.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Heidi?
So I guess there's two sections of sidewalks that we keep talking about on Greeno Drive. There's the portion that's a part of this development, and we are guaranteed pretty much to have infrastructure improvements there within, at the latest, 3 years, basically. And then there's the 700 feet that bridge the gap between this development and what exists today. And that's the portion that basically we have no mechanism for. Just to clarify, I feel like they're being interchanged, but there really are two different sections, right? Okay.
Thanks. Any additional transportation related questions while Aaron is here? Okay, I have one, and it's just a simple one, I guess. And Stacy as well. Aaron, just based on your professional judgment, I mean, you are familiar with this area, you're familiar with our road standards. Variance number 2 has a narrower cross section for a portion that's constrained. Do you have any concerns about that? Do you think given the circumstances on the ground that it's the best we can do and workable?
Yeah, I think, I know we looked at this with Troy and his team when we were reviewing the subdivision plans. And I think what is contained there is sort of our consensus on what makes the most sense to do today. Obviously, anytime you're putting in infrastructure improvements like this ahead of what, having a good design concept for a road, that you always run the risk of, and I think this is important when thinking about sort of the broader Greeno Drive, or, what we're requiring, that you always run the risk of either constraining yourself in the future in terms of what you could design for the whole corridor, or having to go in and tear up infrastructure that's 5 years old to replace it with what we think is the best design ultimately. So, ideally we would have a really good concept for what the design of Greeno Drive would be today, but we don't. And so I think what we have commented on and what is in the proposal is sort of our best estimation of what will work for this corridor.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Stacy and then Jennifer.
Thanks so much. And I apologize. I was a couple minutes late, so I didn't know if this was brought up at the beginning of the transportation conversation. But I know that we received public comment in regards to concern about the number of traffic or increased trips on Greeno Drive, and didn't know if you had addressed that and kind of like what is the capacity and when was the last time a traffic study was done? And if that's all been addressed, please disregard.
Yeah, I think that's something we looked at in our review and made sure that there's adequate capacity on Greeno Drive, and I think there is. We would have noted if there wasn't enough sufficient capacity. It's a fairly small number of housing units, and so yeah, it's going to create trips, but it's pretty close to the core of Missoula. Those impacts on the broader transportation network should be fairly limited, and I think there's plenty of capacity today to accommodate what's the vehicle trips anticipated from this development. I think that was there a second part of that I'm forgetting to address, Stacy?
No, that was great. I know that we periodically, due to growth and things like that, do updated traffic studies, and I didn't know if there had been one recently and kind of what would be a triggering event for one on Greeno.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's something we could add into our analysis. Like I was mentioning, we'll have our transportation safety team continue to take a look at this, do some speed studies. We can look at traffic volumes, things like that. But my understanding is that there isn't really a capacity problem with Greeno Drive right now. There may be at other locations. So as you get further down the hill and as you get into Spruce and Madison and Broadway, but even those, my understanding, I haven't seen anything that suggests those are at sort of maximum capacity today. So I don't think this subdivision is going to break any of those intersections. But it's something that we continue, certainly with the long range transportation plan. We look at projected growth and modeling, and that we include anticipated growth, say in the Rattlesnake, in that regional transportation demand model, and so we can use that as a tool to sort of see what it's going to look like in the future and where we might want to make some investments.
Great, thanks. Jennifer?
So my concerns are less about capacity, truly about number of cars, than it is about speed and the speed at which those cars are coming into right at the tracks and crossing into downtown, particularly again, that crosswalk. It makes me concerned about other crosswalks that we may put in along that corridor. And with the trail system and, the waterworks thing sort of being redone, all of those things. So just to clarify that is kind of where some of these questions are coming from. I do have two follow-up questions. One, on the constricted section that Jordan just mentioned, I think there is a proposed sidewalk there, and it's narrower, I think, than maybe you might otherwise put in. Is that the section where the guardrail currently is? And if it is, will the guardrail go away, or does it get moved, or does it stay where it is? I just couldn't quite tell.
I might let Dave, I haven't looked at the specific, I can't remember off the top of my head, and I apologize, I don't have the maps put up. I don't know, Dave, if you can.
Yeah, so just to orient everyone, so here's coming up Greeno Drive, the road to the trailhead. You can see that there's sidewalk along both sides of the street. Here's the subject property. Across the street are 5 10-unit apartment buildings, so 50 units right here. You have a sidewalk coming down Peggio, and a proposed sidewalk or crosswalk, would link the Peggio sidewalk to the sidewalk in the proposed development. And then in terms of, so here's Cherry Gulch, heavily
That's
forested.
what I'm talking about, yeah.
Okay, right. And so there's a guardrail along kind of this little stretch along Cherry Gulch.
And does that piece get any sidewalk there, or is that not considered a part of the? That's what I'm wondering. Does that guardrail go away? There's a trail behind the guardrail that drops off onto a pretty steep section of Cherry Gulch, and I'm just kind of wondering.
So here's the plat, and there would be new sidewalk along Cherry Gulch right here. Sorry, that yellow
And does that mean that the guardrail goes away then?
There would be a guardrail, a new guardrail to replace the current one, but it would be farther to the Cherry Gulch side.
Okay,
So the sidewalk would be on the street side of the guardrail,
okay.
as opposed to that kind of the worn path that you use right now.
And then can I just have one follow-up, Jordan?
Yeah, go ahead.
So just to clarify that the 700 or so feet of sidewalk, that would be a gap, that's not included in this project. And Greeno Drive is not on the CIP list for the next 5 years. So that piece of sidewalk would not be getting addressed for at least the next 5 years. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair statement. At least not in our current CIP plan.
The one
And-
thing, if I could just comment, is that I think it's important that we think about, I mean, we're talking about larger transportation issues, which is really important, but I also think it's important to think about the subdivision, potential impacts on the existing infrastructure, and you know, I think it's important to hone in the discussion a little bit on the subdivision and the rezoning application as opposed to the larger issues that might need to be addressed over time. They're a little distinct.
Can I have a follow-up, Jordan?
Yeah, go ahead.
I understand that, but we're talking about this subdivision here also at the same time that sort of just across and down, we're talking about a whole new trailhead situation. So I don't think it's necessary that we look at them in isolation. And I think it would actually be a mistake to do so. And I do hear you, but at the same time, I just want to clarify that this piece where people would be crossing the street there in a downhill situation where people can get up to speed, it starts to just feel like a safety concern to me. So I just wanted to clarify that piece. And then my last question would be, are there other, I think you had mentioned, Aaron, there might be some creative solutions that maybe it's not a sidewalk, but there's some sort of like deterrent, or I don't know, this isn't what I do, but like something that protects pedestrians who either are trying to cross or who are just walking on that piece that isn't connected. Also, I mean, I'm thinking about kids ride their bikes up there all the time. I went up there the other day and there was a 10-year-old who was biking on that trail on the other side of the guardrail. And I stood to watch to see, is he going to go on the street side or is he going to go on the Cherry Gulch side? You know, I'm just curious, like, how are the kids on their, bikes managing that? So I would just, are there any creative solutions that we could think about?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are always opportunities for especially creative interim solutions that maybe aren't the ideal, but provide a safer space. And we'll continue to look at those. We often work closely and try to work closely with our streets division. So going out with Brian Hensel and Chad and streets folks to look at ways that we can utilize space a little bit differently to create that. And maybe it's creating a temporary paved side path or something like that provides at least some space for people that's more accessible and safer. And so, we have tried to do that. Again, like Greeno Drive is really constrained. We don't have a ton of opportunity like we do in some other locations where there's just more width. So I can't promise that there is something that we can go out and do and it'll be an easy, quick fix. But, I can commit that we'll look at it and we'll try to find any opportunity to make those improvements, and particularly looking at where we have those crossings, make sure we can make it as safe as possible, and then look for some of those, like see if we can go out there on a street maintenance project and just pave an extra 4 or 5 feet on the shoulder and create that space for people to be in that feels a little bit safer and has some better separation. I know that's not a fully satisfying answer, but I think we're always looking for those sort of quick wins that we can do within our existing budgets and maintenance activities to make those improvements. And we'll certainly continue to do that and maybe take another look here to see if there's something we can creatively do.
Great. Thanks. Stacy, is your hand up from before or from now? Okay, great. Daniel?
Just to kind of piggyback off of that talking point that Jennifer was bringing up with the speed and things, I was curious if you all had looked into like possibly doing like a roundabout around there, because that's what really makes people slow down, or if the crosswalk was one of those crosswalks where like in town, between the university that goes over Arthur, it's a raised crosswalk. So like things like that also make people slow down. And I just think those are a couple options. I don't know if they both fit in here, but just I feel like, yeah, sometimes you have to force cars to slow down, or at least get one of those slow down signs.
Yeah, no, and I think we can look at that. Typically, we do, I mean, I think the context matters, but typically we don't do raised sort of, or, keep the ped crossing at the grade of the sidewalk across collectors where, the priority movement is along the collector as opposed to across it. So we'll do that treatment a lot of times where a shared use path is, or a sidewalk is following a collector and crosses a local street. So when the local street is intersecting, you have that clear definition of where you have a trail or a high profile ped crossing. But I think we can look at some other ways to try to slow traffic. I think the roundabout idea that really needs to be part of a comprehensive design for Greeno Drive, that we wouldn't want to put that in now without knowing how we're going to design Greeno Drive and what the volumes are, and make sure that it's the appropriate traffic treatment for that particular intersection. So I think that's something that we can look at with a corridor design for Greeno Drive. Yeah, I don't know that I have much else. I think there's a lot of context here and things that we can look at, like you're suggesting, that do help slow vehicles. And so I think we just need to look at what the speeds actually are, and maybe there is an opportunity to change the speed limit, or shift that speed limit sign further up Greeno Drive, do a speed, some studies of whether that would help provide the added safety for people along the corridor.
Great, thanks, Aaron. I don't see any other hands up on transportation related questions. So Aaron, maybe we'll let you go. I guess just a comment is that we have infrastructure deficiencies all around the city, and development review highlights that and shines a spotlight on that. And we've talked about a lot of things today that are not necessarily caused by, are not caused by this development. And so I think it's a good discussion, and it's a balance that we have to continue to think about as we do development review. But a lot of good issues raised that are certainly relevant to this development. Oh, sorry, Aaron.
If I could just add really quickly before I check out, if there are other questions that come up, especially as they relate to our broader strategies, definitely let me know. And I'm always happy to come back and have a more open discussion around our CIP process, our long range transportation planning, sort of what our funding looks like, how we're making these decisions, and make sure that we're doing that in a way that is most effectively meeting the city's goals. So I think those conversations are always productive and helpful. And so that may be a good opportunity sort of outside of a specific subdivision review to get a handle on what that looks like and really have a detailed discussion. So please keep that in mind. And I can work with Mirta on potentially doing a public works committee update on just some of our transportation elements to continue this conversation, if that would be helpful. But if anything comes up specific to the subdivision, please, Dave can reach out. I can work on some responses to that as necessary.
Thanks, Aaron. Heidi?
A non-transportation related question.
Okay.
So
I think you're probably good to go at this point. So
okay. So I heard Nathan say that there is a future phase that is a part of, I guess, the existing development that's off Peggio Lane, the 5-10 unit structures. Do we have, and this is probably a Dave question, but do we have an idea what those future phase is platted for density wise? I'm just curious, or a timeline. I guess maybe when it expires, do plats expire? Is that a silly question?
Yeah, plat approvals do expire, but I do not know any additional plans in the vicinity. Don't have any information on that. Sorry.
Nathan, do you have any idea what the density is on that phase?
You know, I don't know. And I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing because I don't know enough. I know there's been talks of something happening, and I know that the street was designed to allow for the potential of it continuing into that neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Marita?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on issues of mass grading and the phasing for that, and revegetation or replanting or if you can go over in more detail about how air quality and stormwater is going to be addressed in this issue, in this site.
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that. So I think there's two separate issues. There's the kind of the permanent stormwater controls that'll have to exist after the subdivision to ensure that there's adequate drainage facilities, but then there's also that interim process when they're actually doing the work out there. And so let's address, we'll go in construction sequence. So the full site grading has been an issue for us with dust control. I think most particularly it's been out George Elmer area, North George Elmer area. Some of that was due to just extenuating circumstances of different construction sites not having the access that they needed and have the access through one site. But a whole nother part of it is that the city hasn't done a great job. We have the tools to enforce construction sequencing through our erosion control, our stormwater permitting system, and then also through DEQ. And so, the DEQ SWIP permit, which is stormwater pollution prevention during construction, it very specifically says you have to delineate your steps through your construction sequencing. So a lot of times contractors think construction phasing, and that might be mass site grading. Then we do vertical construction. Then we do what the SWIP does is it's actually asking you to look at it in a sequence from a stormwater perspective. So the first part is probably clearing and grubbing. Then we're looking at utility infrastructure. So in this instance on this site, I don't know that there isn't a way that they're not going to have to disturb a big portion of it to grade it out. Those, it's a steep site and those roads are steep, and they're going to have to put those roads in. And then when they put those roads in, they're going to have to kind of feather the road grade out into the lots. So there is going to be substantial disturbance on the site. But it's a matter of us as city staff doing a better job when they submit their erosion control plans to us, in requiring them to provide a phasing plan that includes, temporary stabilization measures after they've maybe cleared an area, but they're not going to touch it for 2 weeks or longer is generally the time frame. So that might be temporary seeding. That can be, you can run a track on it back and forth to create little pockets so that the water kind of has a place to stop when it is raining and it doesn't cause a bunch of real erosion. So it's a matter of enforcing that from a plan perspective when they submit it, but then also for us, they're required to have their own SWIP administrator that's supposed to ensure that they actually are meeting what's in the plan. And then we have our own city staff do inspections. So it's a matter of that SWIP inspector and the city staff working together to make sure that they are actually complying with what is in their plan. Does that help on that front?
Yeah, may I have a quick follow-up, Jordan?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering too if, and you're right, I think my questions are coming from the experience that we've had in the Mullen area where it's, it's open, there's a lot of wind, but I'm sure you have heard many on your department talking about how to better address dust and air pollution. And I guess I'm wondering if, one potential solution would be, or way to monitor is to install installment of particulate matter devices to see how the air quality is being affected by the mass grading. I know that Ben Schmidt with the county health department has had a few ideas, wondering if this is something that we should explore here as well. I'm not entirely sure if this is in the air stagnation zone, but if it is, I think it would benefit the community to have a better way to track if all the mass grading, all the dust is affecting air quality, especially during the months when it's already, the air is already compromised. So I guess my question is this in the air stagnation zone? And if so, would that trigger some more fine-tuned monitoring of air quality?
I don't know if it's in the air stagnation zone, but I can try to pull up the map really quick. But no, I did see that email from Ben, and I think that's a great idea. I don't know that we would initially have the authority to tell them that they have to install one and take action upon it. But I do think it's a good idea for us as staff to explore that. And maybe it's this project or maybe it's another project out in the Mullen build area, or maybe even, what might be a good idea is part of the actual Mullen build construction. We have a lot more control over that, right? Because we're paying the contractor on Mullen build. And so we would have a little bit more control over telling them what they can and can't do out there. But yeah, I think it's really worth exploring.
Great, thanks. Heidi?
So I also had some questions around this issue. I guess the enforcement mechanisms that you just described, are those only applicable to stormwater though? The SWIP and our internal, I guess, city mechanisms, or do they apply to air quality too?
I don't know how they apply to air quality, to be frank. I'm not aware of that, but I do know that we do have mechanisms within our own internal policies for stormwater, pollution prevention, and DEQ. And so basically the way that the SWIP program runs, we generally think of it as sediment-laden stormwater that's leaving the site and causing a mess, but it's basically any sediment leaving the site. So whether that's through stormwater or dust, or vehicle tracking that pulls it out onto the street. So we certainly do have the mechanisms to do that.
And I can answer that or address it a little bit, Heidi, as well, because I spoke with Ben Schmidt from the air quality division today. I was asking kind of the same questions, and he said, that City County Health Department can require "quote unquote" reasonable measures to reduce fugitive dust emissions, and there are pros and cons with that kind of vague language. In some, but Ben said it provides them with the flexibility to require certain dust control measures when necessary. He said, and this is based on rules that have been adopted. He did point out to me, he brought up kind of the Mullen area, and he did say that the soils are quite different in that area. They're much finer and more, I guess, reactive, so to speak. It's also different terrain than in this case, than in the Greeno Heights subdivision. So I think in the Mullen area, it's more likely to generate dust. I'm not a soils expert, but that seemed to be, that's what he conveyed to me.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. The Mullen build area is a much more silty clay soil, where most of the valley is a gravelly soil. And so that silty clay soil, it causes all sorts of issues because when it dries out, it turns into like a moon dust that's super easy to, whether it's wind or vehicles that drive over it, become airborne. And then during rainy events, you can't hardly even move out there. So a lot of times they even have to shut down construction. And then to follow up on an earlier question, this is within the air stagnation zone, according to the county GIS map that I pulled up.
Sorry, is or is not?
It is. Yes.
Yes. Okay, thanks. Heidi, are you done or did you have a follow-up?
I think so. I think it would be may be helpful when we revisit, I don't know, maybe during the creation of the UDO process, if maybe we flag air pollution as something to explore a little more, whether we need tools to be able to, I don't know, like it require developers up front to have some sort of mitigation strategies. But I don't know if it's going to be that big of an issue here specifically. So
I think where I would like to see the program going, and I think we are headed in that direction. It just takes time. But if you go to other states that have had erosion control programs for a lot longer than we have, and even either larger municipalities within Montana have been enforcing this a lot longer than Missoula, is that it does become standard operating procedure for the contractors to be much more cognizant of not just clearing the site, right? That's the easy thing to do. And that's what they've always done in Missoula. And they're gonna yell at our inspectors. They're gonna be upset. They'll probably yell at you that we're costing a whole bunch more money when we start to enforce that they can't just strip the whole site. But they'll learn to do it. And so they'll learn that it's to their benefit, right? Because then we don't have inspectors going out there telling them they need to stop the productive work they're doing and address the stormwater, and then they get into a reactive sense rather than being proactive. And so it'll take a little bit of time, but I think we can get there too, where everyone's educated and it just becomes their normal procedure.
Thanks. Jennifer?
I just have an unrelated to air quality question. So if anyone's ready to move on, or if other people still want to talk about this, I can wait.
Go ahead. I think we will take your question or comment, and then we need to move on to our other item in a moment.
I just had a question about the, in terms of clearing, and will there still be, I know the back side of the property, sort of the side of the property that leads down toward Greeno Park is pretty steep, but I'm wondering, will there be like a natural buffer, tree buffer, or I'm just curious what it will look like from Greeno Park when you're walking that path, in terms of that space that used to be considered, whatever that is, open space designation there.
Yeah, picture's worth 1,000 words. I can share my screen really quick. You guys are seeing this. I kind of pulled this up ahead of time. Do you guys see
it? It's on its way for me. It says that you've started screen sharing, but I'm not seeing anything yet.
Oh.
Are others seeing it, or is that the same?
Holding envelopes are.
I'm seeing what you're seeing, Jordan. Just a thing that says Andy Schultz has started sharing his screen.
Sorry, can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Andy, are you showing the plat with the building envelopes?
Sorry, Zoom crashed. I'm back, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Again?
Yeah. Sorry, I might not try to share my screen and create a mess like that again, but there is a building envelope set back from the edge of the lot line, and then we're requiring that they grade a swale in along the back lot line basically through the whole perimeter of the subdivision to capture any stormwater. So that might be generated from the back part of the lot before it goes over that steep slope. That's a big concern of ours. And so there will be a buffer. I don't think that we need to see the final grading details. I don't know that we want a bunch of trees planted in that swale. I think we need that swale there to ensure that stormwater is being retained and conveyed, and trees grow up over time and can plug up that swale. But yes, I think there will be a buffer.
Okay, thanks. Mirta?
Thanks. just want to go back to the air stagnation zone and request that if there, I can't remember if there are specific requirements for developments inside the air stagnation zone, but if there are, could we just make sure that that's addressed in terms of mitigation? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, this will come back on April 11th for final consideration. And if you have any additional questions during that time, feel free to reach out to Dave or myself. And so we can move on to the plat adjustment request for relocation of a 10-foot public access easement on lot 1 of McNett Flats subdivision. I have to step out for a moment, so I'm going to turn the meeting over to Heidi West to run this item, and I'll be back for our next meeting. Thanks, Heidi.
All right. Yeah, so we'll take up the next item, 3.2, and Lauren Stevens is here to answer questions and present on it. We saw this Monday night, so we should have a good basis to start from.
Yeah, thank you. I have my presentation. If anyone wanted to, I can briefly run through that again, or if you have any questions, I can address those. Just wasn't quite sure what would be most helpful for everyone.
I don't know that we need to see the presentation again. Let's just go ahead and open it up to questions. It seemed like a pretty straightforward request. So I'm not seeing anybody's hands flying up. Oh, Mirta's got a question.
Could you put up just I guess the one slide that had what the request is? I think that would be really helpful.
Yes. Let's see if I can share the right screen here. So which slide exactly were you?
I think this one's pretty good because it just shows what's there now, what's being proposed and existing.
Okay. Yeah, so the existing one is what I've circled here on these slides is just the distance from the edge of that easement to the corner of that lot, and just for reference that it's shifting about 24 feet to the west. Slightly different shape, but essentially the same location for access to connect to future development north of this site.
Does anybody else have any questions on this item? Nope. So this is held open. The public meeting closes next Monday, I believe. So I guess if we don't have any questions, we can go ahead and just keep it open, and we'll revisit it next Monday, the April 11th. That's the date.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess I'll ask for if anybody in the public is here to comment on this agenda item. Let's do that. And I am also not seeing any folks wanting to comment on it. So let's go ahead and adjourn the meeting. All right.